So it's just a real pleasure to welcome up the incredible leader, the Mr. Ian Prukner.
All right, hey, good morning, everybody. How's everybody feeling? So you obviously heard big news. We're making a big push this month. You guys are part of something historic and special, and I couldn't be more excited about the event we're having today. It is a very different event than normal, right? Y'all know our normal Super Saturdays are really focused on developing. Rich, there's some 50 Cent going on here, buddy. I'm all white and all, but you watch my moves, right? I'll be killing some of you in the front row, man. Right? Okay. Anyways, you know, we normally have an event in a certain way, and this is a boot camp Super Saturday. So I hope you brought your notepads. I hope you brought your pens. I hope you plan on paying attention, because I'm going to teach you what's in here, right, and what comes out across the kitchen table when it comes to securities, recruiting, and kitchen table presentations. Okay, and so I'm going to teach you exactly what I do, exactly how I do it, okay, and exactly why we do that. And so it's going to be kind of a different format, right? It's going to be a lot of back and forth. And if you have questions, raise your hand and ask them. Okay, if it's a stupid question, I'll let you know. Don't be embarrassed. Okay, but we'll just move on. And so, anyways, listen. We're going to go fast. We got a lot of stuff, and my buddy Jeff is here. How many of you were at dinner with the winners last night? Raise your hand. Now, was that one of the most awesome dinner with the winners you ever been to? Okay. Look, you guys got to win that crap, man. Okay. We had a question and answer session. There were some great questions, some even better answers, and so congratulations if you were part of it. So we're going to jump right in on securities, okay? I'm going to teach you guys a couple of things. First of all, for our people that are recording this for our compliance purposes, if you're not securities licensed, you cannot be soliciting securities anyway, having conversations about securities at the kitchen table. But here's what you can do, and here's what you should be doing: picking up statements and bringing them to the office, right? You're allowed to ask them as a civilian, right? Somebody filling out an F&A, do you have an old retirement account, right? Do you have an IRA somewhere? Great. Let me pick up the statements. I'm going to take them back to my office, and I'm going to bring somebody back with me that's an expert in this area, right? So listen, some of you need to be writing down that verbiage right there. I'm going to bring back an expert in this area with me, right? Okay, listen, it's so important that you pick up those assets. Some of you that are not securities licensed and you're sandbaggers, you're like, man, I got this guy out here, it's got this, and this guy, I'm going to wait. Those assets will be gone by the time you come back with your securities license. Get them moved, get them in, and take them over once you're licensed, right? And take over those residual trails, okay? But the first thing I'm going to teach you, some of you have seen this before, some of you have not, is the triangle. So once you are securities licensed, you can start talking about this. You may practice this now, but do not do this in front of a client if you are not securities licensed. Let me say that one more time. If you are not securities licensed, the stuff I'm going to show you in this first part, man, learn it, practice it. But if you show it to a client, you're going to go to jail, okay? Right? They don't treat us real nice in jail, right? You're too pretty, okay? So listen, the first thing in getting somebody to feel comfortable investing money with you, right? In reality, especially if you're newer, right? People are concerned that you're going to be managing their money. And they know Aristida, the builder, right? Or they know, Amy, the interior designer. They're like, what does she know about managing money, right? Okay, what does she know about managing money? So here is a presentation that allows you to help your clients understand really what you do, right? Okay, and so you need to get good at drawing the triangle. Because clients are going to ask you, well, who's going to manage the money? You? And the answer is no. Right? No, I'm not going to manage the money. Neither is your guy at Merrill Lynch or anywhere else, right? So I say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, there's 3 people involved in helping you to invest your money. Okay? There's you, me, and the money manager. We all have 3 different roles in helping you to succeed in your investments. Now, if you guys can't see that over there, shift yourself over here, okay? It's important that you learn this, okay? So I said we each have a couple of roles. You have 2 jobs for me. Number 1, okay, is you need to tell me what you want. That's your job. You need to tell me what you want this money to do. Okay, your second job is to stay disciplined in the approach that we put together for you. That's your job, Mr. and Mrs. Client. My job is twofold. I need to understand your goals. You cannot hear? No. Okay. Can you hear in the back or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, very good. My job is to understand your goals. My second job, okay, is to know which money managers can help you reach those goals. The money manager, Mr. and Mrs. Client, has one job: to buy and sell to make your mutual fund money. Mr. and Mrs. Client, I am not the person that's going to be buying and selling for you, and you should be thankful. Right? Because if I'm talking to you right now, what am I not doing right now? Managing money. And when I'm talking to your next door neighbor that you refer me, what am I not doing? Managing money. And Mr. and Mrs. Klein, I want you to understand that no matter where you go, if you're going to deal with a human being that claims to be your financial advisor, the fact that they are talking to you means that they are not managing the money. Mr. and Mrs. Client, we're going to give your money to professional money managers. I don't care how much money you put with them. You can't call them on the phone. They're not interested in talking to you. They don't know who you are, and they don't honestly care. They have one job, Mr. and Mrs. Client, and that is to manage the money. They have a research team, fully staffed, developed, right? Researching everything about anything. Mr. and Mrs. Client, who do you think knows more about where interest rates are going in China and what that's going to do to your portfolio 6 months from now? Me or the guy managing $10 billion with a fully staffed research team that's job is to know that? Who do you think is going to know more about it? The money managers, right? My job is to know you and to know the money managers and help you make the best choice of where to put your money. Mr. and Mrs. Client, so do you understand what my role is here? Right? I'm not going to manage your money. I'm going to help to connect you to the people that are going to manage your money. All right? Does anybody have any questions on this presentation? That does so much for building confidence in the people that you're helping to invest, because they're looking at you like, gosh, I don't know if I want Matt, the police officer, managing my money. And right? And they all think that's what we do. Right? But that's not what we do, correct? Very good. All right, let's keep moving. So the next presentation I want to help you with is on mutual fund sales charges. Okay? How do you deal with that, right? How do you guys get paid? How do you guys make money? You know, what are my fees? I don't like fees, etc. Okay? First of all, is there any such thing as a free lunch? No. No, there's not such a thing as a free lunch. Okay? Everything has some form of an expense. Okay? But here's how I explain to clients this process so they're not shocked, right? Because you have to disclose your cost, right? Okay? A lot of you don't do a very good job of that. So here's a really great way to not only help the client understand, but to help them pick and buy in with you on how you're doing this, right? So I'd say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, there are essentially 3 ways you as an individual investor can invest money into a managed mutual fund, okay? You can invest it in a class A, B, or C. Mr. and Mrs. Client, there's essentially 3 ways a mutual fund can charge you, okay? Way A, up front, right? You put the money in, they can potentially charge you up front. The second way is when you sell it. So you have a mutual fund, you sell that mutual fund, they may charge you at that point. The third way is ongoing expenses. 3 ways that mutual fund can be charging you. I want to help you understand how they work so we can make the best choice for you. Okay? By the way, what do we sell 100% of the time here? A shares. And you're going to see why in a second, right? Okay? But I'm not going to come out and tell the client the only thing I'm going to offer you is this. I'm going to help them get to the realization that that is the best choice for them. right? So an A mutual fund can charge you up to 5.75% one time. Put the money in, they can charge you up to 5.75%. B share charges you 0. A C share generally will charge you about 1% in. And then I asked them this. This is where you need to listen to exactly what I'm saying. Mr. or Mrs. Client, based on the information available to you right now, which is the best choice for you? B. They always pick what? B. B. I say, wonderful, great. Now watch this. When we sell an A share to rebalance or do something different, we pay no expense. On a B share, we pay up to 5%, and generally on a C share, we pay about 1% to get out. Mr. or Mrs. Client, based on the information that you now have, which do you feel is the best way for you to have your money invested? A, B, or C?
C.
Now they generally pick C. Why? Common sense. Mr. or Mrs. Client, there's one last part of this that we need to make sure we understand. That's an ongoing management expense. On an A share, it's going to average about 0.75% per year. On a B share, you're going to be about double that. And on a C share, you may be as high as 1.75 to 2% a year, depending on what it is. Now, Mr. or Mrs. Client, right? We're talking about your retirement account. You're going to have this here for a number of years. So let's look at the 20-year cost of this, okay? So 20 years at 0.75 a year is what? 15, right? So the total ongoing cost was 15% of the original principal over 20 years. You following that? Plus our transaction cost, right? Of 5.75, so that's equal to what? 20.75. So that's your total cost. Now you're going to earn money along the way, but if it never earned money in 20 years, that's what it cost you, right? And way B. Now B shares convert to A shares, etc. It's a little bit of a math problem, right? Okay. For practical intents and purposes, we're going to assume the same thing. We had a transaction, right? And what's 15 years of that, or 20 years of 1.5?
30.
30. It's going to be a little less than that because this will go down after some time, right? But just for the practical illustration, plus 30% is what?
35.
35% over the same 20 years, right? A C share, let's assume the transactions, right? We want to show them worst case. 1 and 1 is 2, plus 20 years of 1.75 is what? 35, right?
35.
So your total is what?
37.
37%. So Mr. and Mrs. Client, over 20 years, that's your total cost, A, B, or C. Which one do you feel like is the best fit for your retirement account? Are you sure?
Yes.
Clearly, right? Okay, clearly better. Mr. and Mrs. Client, that's what I'm going to recommend that you have. So I want you to understand there's going to be an expense up front, but it's going to be lowest total cost for you to keep this over time. Do you understand that, Mr. and Mrs. Client? This is how you deal with explaining, disclosing sales charge, as well as getting the client to understand they really are doing the best thing available to them by going with an A share for a long-range retirement account. Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Any questions on what we just went through? I know it's a little bit of math. Write it down, take a picture of it, but this is what you do. We're teachers, right? We teach clients how to make better decisions. I promise you, no financial advisor on planet Earth has ever explained fees to them at all, let alone how they work and helping them to make a good choice. Any questions on that? Rich, can you keep me on time here? We'll go to 9:40 on this one. Okay.
Are you taking questions?
I will take questions if people have questions. Go ahead.
So I have a question. Maybe you're going to
Speak
get to
loud.
This. Yep. So maybe you're going to get to this, Ian. But my question is, somebody says, "Hey, I invest only in no-load mutual funds." Can you address
Good.
that?
Yeah, I will address that. So what is a no-load mutual fund? Well, generally no cost, right? They can charge, listen to this, a no-load fund generally is an index fund, right? No load generally means no expenses, and with no expenses comes what? No service, no advice, no management, okay? Generally an index fund. It tracks the index. The index goes up 30%, it's trying to do that. Index goes down 30%, it's trying to do that. There's nobody there trying to unsink the Titanic. They're just going down with the ship, right? Okay, so here's how you explain that. So I'd say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I appreciate that you want to get rid of expenses, and that's a smart thing to do, okay? Right? We want to pay as little expense as possible. But I think you're missing another part of the equation, and that is, what is the return? So Mr. and Mrs. Client, let's say we had two mutual funds, Mutual Fund A and Mutual Fund B. Mutual Fund A is the no-load fund that you are describing here. So you're paying no expenses. Mutual Fund B is a mutual fund, right? Okay, that has a manager and expenses. Now, Jeff, let me ask you a question. Let's say your no-load fund earned 9% over time. There are no expenses. You're paying no fees at all. You're getting 9%. Let's say after expenses, your mutual fund earned 11%. So it earned more than that, maybe 12 or 13. It took the expenses, but you as the investor got 9 or 11. Now, Jeff, I know you're not a mathematician, but which of the two funds do you feel like performed better for you? The one that earned you 9 or the one that earned you 11?
I'm going to say that.
You're sure?
Positive.
Even though there were expenses?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Jeff, let me ask you another question. What if I told you the expenses on this fund were 20% a year, but after the 20% expense, you still got 11, and here you were getting 9?
Take 11.
You would still want this one, even though the expenses were 20% a year.
Right.
I appreciate that you don't like expenses. I don't like expenses either, but we need to look at the whole picture,
Sure.
right? Guess what? The best way to have no expense at all is put the money in your mattress,
Yeah.
right? Okay, the problem with that solution is you don't earn any money. So earnings and expenses need to be looked at together. Jeff, if I could show you some actively managed mutual funds that consistently over time in the past had beat the index, right?
Right.
Listen to this, you always have to say this, right? Past performance is not a guarantee of future results.
Right.
But if I could show you something that in the past had beat the index net of expenses, wouldn't you rather have the better performing fund overall?
Yes, it would.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay, that's how you address that. Okay, let's talk about people. Do we have another question over there? Is somebody yelling something? Okay. Let's talk about people now who have a portfolio. Okay, who have a portfolio somewhere. Maybe it's an old 401k. They have an advisor. Okay, here's the deal. You don't want to, you shouldn't, and you really can't be competing on returns. Any dum-dum can go and research the top 10 mutual funds last year, put a Morningstar together of them, and look like a rock star, right? The problem is chasing returns is not a real good strategy. Generally because this year's losers are next year's winners, and this year's winners are next year's losers, right? Okay? So here's the two things that I talk about with people when they have a portfolio. This is how I get an agreement to put a proposal together for them, right? Because a lot of people, I'm good, my guy's doing a great job, etc. I'd say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, do you mind if I tell you a real quick story? Okay? They say, no, that's all right, go ahead. So I say, let me tell you the tale of two investors, Investor A and Investor B. They both start with the same amount of money. They invest $100,000 apiece. Now, I want to look at Investor A and Investor B over the next 5 years. And we're going to follow two different stories here. Okay? Investor A in year one has a phenomenal year in the market, earns 50%. He's happy, right? What does Investor A have in year one? $150,000. Turn his 100 grand to 150 in year one. Boom, he's excited. Year two, pretty bad year in the market, negative 50, right? His 150 grand became what?
75.
75 grand. Most clients will say what? 100. They think it goes back, right? They don't stop and think about it. Next year in the market, man, it recovers another positive 50, right? Your 75K is now worth 112,500, right? Year four, another terrible year, negative 50%. This is yo-yo market extreme, right? Okay. Your 112 is now $56,250. And finally, in year 5, positive 50%. Your $56,000 is now worth roughly $80K. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Client, let's do a little bit of math. If you add 50 and subtract 50, what do you get?
0.
If you add 50 and subtract 50, what do you get?
0.
So you're left with how much total return? Over how many years?
5.
Which is an average of what? Your mathematical average was 10% for the year, but you lost money. How did that happen? Well, Mr. and Mrs. Client, if you have 100K and you lose 50%, what do you have? 50K. If you gain 50% on 50K, what do you have? 75K. Mr. and Mrs. Client, losing money, it does not come back in the same rate it was lost. It's a 2-to-1 ratio in that example. Your 100K becomes 50K. Now you need to earn 100% to get back. Okay? Investor B earns 10%. Year 1, his 100 grand is what?
110.
110. 10% in year 2, 121. 10% in year 3, right? It's about 133. 10% in year 4. Let's call it 145. 10% in year 5. Let's call it 158. 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 is what? 50. Over how many years? 5 years, which is an average return of what?
10%.
But you have 158 grand. Here you have 80K. Mr. and Mrs. Client, how can that be? Same returns, 2 very different amounts of money. And the answer is the movement of the money. The movement of the money. If we're losing money and eating return trying to make it back, it does not work in the same way. Right? So Mr. and Mrs. Client, let's call this movement another word. Let's call it risk or beta. Let's call it risk or beta. Mr. and Mrs. Client, if you had 2 portfolios that earned the same amount, but one had less risk than the other portfolio, which one did better? The one with the less risk. Returns are the same, less movement means more upward, right? Does this make sense? Okay. So here's what I asked them. I'd say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I'd like to take your portfolio with me and do a little bit of analysis on it. And when I come back, I'm going to be able to show you how much risk you took and your average returns. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back a couple of other portfolios that over the same time period have averaged similar returns, maybe better, but took less risk than your portfolio. Now, Amy, we can't obviously guarantee what's going to happen in the future, but if I was able to show you a portfolio that took less risk, right, and had similar returns over the same period of time, those managers were doing a better job managing the assets. They were getting the same returns, but they weren't exposing us to as much risk to get the returns. Amy, I would consider that to be a better balanced portfolio. Would you agree with that statement? Absolutely. If I could show you that, is there any reason you would want to stay in a higher risk portfolio than you need to be? You're sure?
Awesome. Great,
because I'm going to spend some time doing this, and when I come back, if I can show you that, I'd like you to move your money with me.
Question.
And this is how I take large sum portfolios and give them some parameters. You've got to create a frame for the client to understand what you're talking about. If you don't, they're always going to be concerned about this piece or that piece or this piece instead of how does the whole piece work, right? What are the fees? That's a good question. A better question is what was my net return and how much risk did I take getting that net return compared to what I have now? 1, and then 2, and then we're done.
So this last diagram, are we allowed already to show that if you're
No.
not? Okay, that's what I'm
If
asking.
you are not securities licensed and you show this crap to people, I'm going to beat you with a rod at the office, okay? Yeah. So get your securities license, but start practicing. And more important, understand the concept behind it. What I love about Primerica is it's principle-based. Principles don't change. Money works in a certain way. Whether you have a lot or a little, it all works in a similar way, right?
said don't chase return because then you don't have to put a Morningstar portfolio together to do that. Is this not just chasing beta? Like in the same thing? Could somebody else just?
It's a good question. So the way I look at it is anybody can pick one of the two. You can go and put your money all in bonds and then compare it to the S&P 500 and your beta looks awesome. Right? Okay? Or you could go and pick the 10 best mutual funds, right? And compete on return and you look awesome. What I'm trying to do is find a really well managed portfolio, right? That's doing both of them. That is not as easy to do, right? You go chasing returns, you get whatever beta you get. You go creating the lowest beta in the world, you get whatever returns you get, right? You following that? What I'm looking for is how do we create a portfolio that balances it? And what does it mean moving forward? Right? What can you say it means? Well, you can't guarantee anything, right? But the way I look at it is the strategies that are being employed by these money managers over that time were more conservative strategies that netted out similar results, right? We don't want to take any more risk than we have to, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, so I don't see it as chasing one or the other, but rather educating people on the importance of both and how they work together to give you an overall investment strategy. Does that make sense? One more question. Going once? Okay.
Any audio that you can pick up with these 3 presentations in it, like on digital?
Rich, I think I have this crap on an audio somewhere, right? Okay, it's somewhere. It does exist. Rich will try to find it for you. Yeah. All right. Listen, guys, we got a great meeting for you. Hopefully this was helpful. We're going to do a lot more stuff like this. So please welcome back up Nate Braley.